This video is brought to you by AudioQuest, makers of the Dragonfly range of USB DACs. Click to AudioQuest.com for more information.
The Buchardt S400 MKII stand mount loudspeaker. You can see it behind me in the walnut veneer. It is one hell of a loudspeaker, but so too is the KEF LS50 Meta, dressed in blue behind me. Today, we look at the differences between these loudspeakers. So, the Buchardt S400 MKII are designed in Denmark, made in Indonesia. They are sold direct for €2,000 per pair anywhere in the world. You get free shipping. You get a 45-day home demo, which is the best kind of demo. You get a 10-year warranty. And because they are sold direct, there is no dealer-distributor network to support. Unlike the KEF, which are sold through a dealer-distributor network. And in Germany, they sell for €1,300 a pair, so quite a bit cheaper than the Buchardts. And the KEFs are designed in the UK, made in China. But it's the way that they are sold that I really want to kind of underscore here, and I want you to remember those differences because we'll be coming back to them. Now, I have the KEFs attached to their custom designed S2 floor stand. It's the blue one, obviously, to match the colour of the loudspeaker. They sell for €450 per pair. And I have the Buchardts on their own custom stand, so supplied by Buchardt, the sort of mid-century modern legs. They sell for €400 a pair. Now, in terms of build quality with the stands, I think the KEF really nail it here. The Buchardts are fine, but the KEF is just another level above in terms of fit and finish and the way they're put together. And that carries over to the cabinetry. So if you look at the Buchardts closely, they're fine. They look perfectly reasonable. They're just okay. The walnut veneer, I think, is okay. It doesn't wow me because of the matte finish. Even though the KEF is the cheaper speaker of the two, I think its cabinet's fit and finish is a bit better than the Buchardts. So back with the Buchardts, if we look at the tweeter, you'll notice that it's smaller than average. It's 0.74 inches. And according to Buchardt, they've gone with this because a smaller tweeter, according to them, has a better off-axis response. And you should also notice the enormous waveguide around that tweeter, which is made of aluminium. And aluminium was the material used on the bass driver of the Mark I version of the Buchardt speaker. Now it's made of paper. It's a 6-inch mid-bass driver. But notice how it sits above the tweeter, which is unusual, right? Also unusual, the front baffle is canted backwards. So the bass driver sits a little bit further back from the listener than the tweeter. Now, according to Buchardt, the two drivers are crossed over at 1.8 kilohertz. Now, they say that's because the tweeter is so small. And yet, on the KEF, the crossover takes place at 2.1 kilohertz, but the tweeter is a little bit bigger than it is on the Buchardts. And you'll notice on the KEF that the tweeter sits in the middle of the mid-bass driver, which is 5 inches. So we have a tangerine waveguide around that tweeter, but also the mid-bass driver itself acts as a bit of a waveguide as well. But the two drivers are what's called coaxially aligned. And I think the tweeter's set back a little bit as well. And that tweeter is an aluminium dome. And that whole coaxially aligned driver system KEF call UniQ, which is in the 12th generation in this LS50 Meta. On the back of the KEFs, there is a bass reflex port, which is used to extend the bass response of the loudspeaker. Now, Buchardt don't use a port. they use a passive radiator, which behaves a bit like a port. And it's quite a large driver. It measures 8 inches across. And that passive radiator, combined with a larger cabinet and a larger mid-bass driver, helps the Buchardt go lower than the KEFs. So I think the S400 Mark II begin to roll off as they approach 30 Hertz, whereas the LS50 Meta roll off in the mid-40s. And perhaps this is why the Buchardt S400 Mark II sounds bigger and more muscular than the LS50 Meta. And the Buchardt also sound meatier with voices, especially male voices. But I would say that the LS50 Meta have the edge when it comes to top to bottom transparency. You know, that sort of squeegee clean, clear window effect that I've spoken about before. Oh, and I almost forgot. The KEFs are crisper up top. Now, thanks to the KEF's coaxial driver, we can sit closer to them than we can the Buchardts, because we need a distance between the speakers and our sitting position for the two drivers, the two separate drivers above one another, to sort of coalesce at the listening position. So that means I think the KEF are much better for near-field listening, or if you're in a super tiny room, especially if you're in that super tiny room and you have to put the loudspeakers very close to the front wall. The S400 Mark II don't like that too much. You need to give them a bit more room than you do the KEFs. And the KEFs will also come with port bungs, so you can run them sort of quasi-sealed. In slightly larger rooms like this one, which measures 6 meters by 5 meters, I think the Buchardt is the better choice. It's more fun. It's less studious sounding than the KEF. It has more dynamic bounce and get up and go. Should we talk about music for a moment? I think we should, because you probably want to know what kind of music I listen to do this side-by-side comparison. Well, I listened to some fairly full-on techno made by a chap called the Headless Horseman. His first album, I think it's just called Number 7, I think. I listened to Bob Dylan's album Oh Mercy, and also some of the cuts featured in our previous video. And I've got to clarify here, I'm not having a go at that kind of music. Those albums, I mean, who am I to say whether that music is good or bad? The point I was trying to make is that those songs have become cliches in the audiophile world because they are hammered so often at demos and hi-fi shows. However, the one album that I listened to a hell of a lot on both the KEF and the Buchardts is this guy. Oh man. Tranquility Bass's Let the Freak Flag Fly. That's not easy to say. This is from the 90s, from 97, and it's made by a chap called Mike Candell, who sadly passed away in 2015. And that's a real shame, because it is so wonderful in that it's got everything in it. And I don't mean that in a cliched way. It's got like acid funk, psychedelic rock, there's elements of trip hop, there's elements of the Grateful Dead, you can hear that in there. There's two just straight out plain country songs. And there's just these extended guitar jams and maybe Santana type beats. There is everything in the history of music ever in this record. This is a 2LP version. It's not that easy to find on vinyl, on CD, it's a piece of cake. And yes, it is on streaming services. I can't say enough good things about this record. I absolutely adore it, and have done for, it's 25 years old now. Wow, that makes me feel old. On sound staging, the Bucharts play it wider, they play it taller, but the KEFs give us a little bit more detail and specificity in the depth domain. And I'd also say that the S400 Mark II are slightly richer, slightly warmer than the KEFs, although they don't have that sort of squeegee clean wiped window effect. But that makes them a better fit for a broader range of electronics, in my experience. And that's a little bit surprising because the Buchardt is rated nominally by the manufacturer at 4 ohms, which means it's a more current hungry loudspeaker. However, its sensitivity, 88 dB, is 3 higher than the KEF. So in that sense, it's a little bit easier to drive. And I think that the S400 Mark II work better with the more punctilious sounding NAD M10 V2 than do the KEF. I prefer the KEF with the slightly more rounded sounding but less resolving Audiolab 6000A Play. Even though the Audiolab pushes 50 watts per channel, that's half of the NAD, into the KEF's nominally 8 ohm impedance. All these numbers get very confusing very quickly. So the TLDR really of what I've just said is that I find the Buchardt S400 Mark II to be a much better speaker than the KEF LS50 Meta in almost every respect, apart from that sort of overall transparency, especially in the upper mids. I think the KEF give us more there. But everywhere else, the Buchardt take it. Now, why is this? Well, it's not necessarily because of anybody doing a good job or a bad job. It's to do with their sales model, the sales model they talked about at the start. Because I remember talking to Mads Buchardt about a year or so ago, and he was explaining that the S400 Mark II, if they were sold through a dealer distributor network, they might sell for like 3,500 or maybe even more. But because they're sold direct and he doesn't have those companies in place, they don't take their cut. So those savings are passed on to the consumer. Now you might say that's not very fair, but I think it completely is, because the consumer is looking at the €2,000 price point and the €1,300 price point, and that's what they're comparing. They don't care really necessarily or as much about how the speaker is sold, unless of course there's a problem. And then if you bought through a dealer distributor network, it's much easier to get your problem solved in your territory than it is to have to ship the Bucharts back to Denmark. How do the S400 Mark II compare to other speakers? The answer is in the title of this video. However, if there is enough interest in this video, I might do a comparison between the S400 Mark II and their active brethren, the A500, which was really my product of the year 2 years ago. I might do that comparison video in a month or 3. Now the spicy finding for this video is a little bit unusual, because Mads Buchardt sent me these things that he calls sticky jello pads. And apparently these are designed and made in Germany and are intended to sort of dampen the vibrations of drum kits and cymbals. And they're sort of stretchy in all directions. And they sit under the loudspeakers and on top of the stand, so between the stand and the loudspeaker. And you can push the speaker and it will move a little bit, which I guess in theory decouples the loudspeaker from the stand. Now I don't really know what this does to sound because I've only ever used the Bucharts with these in place. But I guess you could investigate this further if you wanted to. I don't know anything more about them than Mads sending me these. So you'll have to email Buchardt and ask them where they get them from, or Google something, you know. You could Google it instead of asking Mads. But yeah, this I thought was really interesting. And it also stops, it stops you from knocking your loudspeaker off the stand as easily. Because if you nudge it, it just sort of wobbles a bit and then comes back. Anyway, if you like this video, please hit the like button down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio, in that side-by-side comparisons are very, very important. Not just comparisons, but side-by-side comparisons. If you dig that, then please subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.
Yep.
Right, okay. On the back of the Buchardt, however, we get an H in one hit, okay. I can't even say it. What's wrong with measures? So that means I think the KEF are much better for Nearfield. No, I'm going to do that again. It doesn't sound as, no, what is it here? It is fun. Yes, did it.